The Prowler, Part 12. I've spent the last few hours toiling in my chambers, planning the demise of these two busybodies, these two witnesses. You might be saying to yourself, why don't you let them live? They didn't actually see you. You may be correct. I may be crazed, but we don't actually know what they saw and heard. The gardener could have seen the whole thing for all I know. He could have actually seen me leave the stables, and not just some shadowy figure as he claims. Plus, I haven't killed in over a night now. With all the extra people around, it's been kind of hard to get away unseen. My blade is getting rusty from its lack of useful activity lately. It must be constantly lubricated with the splatter of blood. I've come up with my plan to dispose of these two nosy miscreants. I believe I'll follow the maid when she shops for the produce and kill her off property, while the gardener I will sneak off and kill while the All Hallows Eve ball is taking place tomorrow night. I think it's perfect. Not being cocky at all when I say I do come up with the cleverest of plans. Not opinions, just facts. I prepared my tools and waited for Gertrude to head to market. She was off to pick up the freshest of produce for the Hallows Eve ball tomorrow night. I peered out of the parlor window and saw her take her leave. I maneuvered myself outside and followed closely behind. She was on foot, so I stayed on foot. A bit of luck came my way when she approached the tree line and made her way into the forest. A shortcut, I'm sure, was her thinking, on her decision to take the woods. But little did she know, it will be her undoing. The only thing that will be getting cut is her throat. As she neared the exit of the trees, I hastened my speed. In my quickness, I stepped on a fallen tree branch and it made a loud snap. It of course startled her, and she turned quickly, but thankfully I was able to hide behind the tree that was just to the right of me. I quickly pulled my blade from its sheath, and just as she turned back around and caught her breath, I leapt out from behind the tree and plunged my blade in the back of her skull. Short and sweet. I didn't have all day to mess around here. She didn't die instantly, so as she took her final breaths, I took the things that made her a witness, her ears. I severed them nice and cleanly, then placed my poem on her body. Before leaving, though, I looked down at her and smugly said, "You should have minded your business. You should have told the reporter nothing." I collected my things, then went back to the manor. Thankfully, this endeavor was so quick, no one even noticed I had left. I quickly made my way up to my chambers and secluded myself inside until dinner. I spent the hours preparing for tomorrow evening's costume de fair. I tried on my costume, making sure the fit was proper, then laid it out along with the mask. Then I made sure my shoes were properly polished and frills starched accordingly. A proper costume indeed. As I finished up, Mr. Lyles gently rapped on my door, informing me dinner was about to be served. I followed him downstairs, talking as we walked. I noticed some servants bringing in large amounts of food for the party. When Lyles informed me that Gertrude had not been heard from in hours, and that he had to send a few servants out to complete the order that Gertrude was supposed to take care of earlier. I feigned concern over Gertrude, all the while laughing on the inside. I told him all is well. I'm sure she'll pop up eventually. The manor was looking festive, I thought, as I sat down at the dinner table. Frightening decorations were being adorned throughout the manor, along with the tables and chairs being set up, and the harpsichord being turned for the occasion. Everything was shaping up quite nicely, I must say. Brother and father were already at the table waiting for me, and I must say what a sad lot of fellows that sat before me. Pep up, gentlemen, I thought. It's almost party time, you sad shites. Of course, with the murders that just transpired at the manor, there were a few individuals around here who thought it best we cancel the party. That they thought it be in poor taste. Mainly my brother, of course. Look at him. There he sat, splashing around in his pea soup like a simple bastard, grieving over that floozy of a wife. Disgusting. As I was saying, I put a stop to that shite quickly. No one was going to put a stop to my All Hallows Eve ball. No one. Dinner was very uneventful, and I finished my meal as quickly as possible and retired back to my chambers. I needed a proper night's rest for tomorrow's activities. I cleaned up my instruments from earlier, then went to bed, staring into the candle flame as I drifted off. I slept beautifully and was awoken with the delivery of my coffee and paper from James. I guess Gertrude's body hasn't been discovered yet, because that bastard Parker Johns hasn't written of her demise. That, however, opened the door for that bastard Jack the Ripper to steal my headlines. He struck again last night. I felt the rage starting to boil inside me, but I did my best to calm down quickly. Today was a big day, and I wasn't going to let that prick Jack upset it. My mind was focused on Lady Smith and the ball. I spent the day preparing and toiling the hours, making sure everything was perfect. Every last detail was taken care of. The time had finally come, and it was time to prepare for the ball. I washed, then covered myself in the finest oils and powders from France, smelling like a proper gentleman. Then made sure my hair and goatee was properly brushed and waxed. Then I stood in front of the mirror and put on my costume. First the white leggings, then the purple trousers, then the white undershirt, next the black vest, buttoned up tightly, followed by the black coat with purple trimmings. Perfect, I thought. I then slipped on the purple demon's mask and went downstairs to wait for Lady Smith to arrive. As I made my way down the stairs, guests started to arrive and were ushered into the ballroom. I went out and stood on the front steps waiting for my beautiful date. The finest couples from the finest families greeted me as they walked by. Everyone wanted to be here. Everyone wanted to attend the first Hallows Eve ball. Even members from the royal family were in attendance. After a few minutes, I spotted her carriage come into view. Butterflies swarmed my stomach like an excited child on Christmas morning. I wanted this evening to be special. I had plans for Lady Smith. Her carriage came to a stop, and I opened the door. Her outreached hand greeted me, and I helped her down the carriage steps. She looked stunning in her turquoise dress and matching mask, resembling a disembodied spirit. Hello, my love. I've missed you so, I said lovingly as I kissed her hand. She smiled and said she had missed me as well. I ushered her inside and escorted her to the ballroom. We danced right away as the orchestra played the waltz of the dead. I stared into her hazel eyes as we twirled around the room. As the song came to an end, I kissed her. Then we found a table off to the side, away from the maddening crowd. I got us some refreshments, and we sat and talked, picking right back up from where we were before. There couldn't be two more people in as much love as we. So on our favorite holiday, during the beautiful All Hallows Eve ball, I took to one knee and proposed to the hauntingly beautiful Lady Smith. I've crossed oceans of time and endless tomorrows to be with you, my love. Will you marry me? I asked most nervously. She looked at me for but a moment, then smiled and said yes, but of course. I announced the news to the entire room, and we received a roarous ovation. I then took my bride's hand and we danced throughout the night. We then sat and had dinner, bringing in an Italian chef direct from Rome to cater to her culinary needs. The meal was delicious. The night and my plans were unfolding perfectly. But as I sat laughing and talking with Brandy, I noticed in the corner of my eye the gardener. He was performing secondary duties tonight and was ushering in and out trays of food. My mind suddenly remembered the sinister task I was supposed to carry out at this catered affair. While yes, I was preoccupied with other things, more lovely and beautiful things, I'm still a killer, and I had a witness to dispose of. While continuing my conversation with Lady Smith, I continued to stalk my prey. When he picked up an empty tray of food and started back towards the kitchen, I excused myself from the table and told my bride I would be right back. I followed and peeked through the opening of the pantry door to see him exit through the back door of the kitchen. I then entered the kitchen, making my way past the staff, then out of the back door, where I saw him heading towards the stables. I followed, making my way towards the stables as quickly and as quietly as possible. When I reached the stable door, I peeked through the crack and found the gardener putting some hay in the horses' stalls. I reached inside my vest and pulled out my blade. No more rust, I thought. It's time to wet the blade. I slithered inside the stable like a venomous snake and emerged from the shadows, surprising him instantly. "Here's your shadowy figure," I said menacingly as I raised my blade in the air. Before he could cry out, I brought it down with such violent anger, slashing it across his face. He fell to the ground. I then grabbed his head by the hair and stretched out his neck, slashing the blade across his exposed throat. "You should have kept your bloody mouth shut," I said to him tauntingly as he took his final breaths. I then gouged out his eyes for my trophies and placed my poem upon his corpse. I then turned with my bloody blade in one hand and eyeballs in the other, when I saw, to my surprise, standing before me, my bride. I stood there in complete shock. All I could say is, "Hello, my love." The Prowler, Part 13. I stood there staring at my lovely bride-to-be, filled with a heart-stopping dread, hoping I wouldn't have to do the unthinkable to my love. It all depended on her next actions. How would she react? I pleaded and begged in my mind as she stared back at me, giving me a once-over. I do not want to kill her. Just then she spoke. I had my suspicions, my dear. There were just too many coincidences of people dying when we were together. The waiter who spilled soup on me, the head inspector meeting his demise after the party a few weeks ago, and the maid Liza going missing and later being found dead, horrifically murdered. I had a feeling you were the Prowler who's been going around savagely murdering the West End citizens. This might not seem proper or ladylike. At first I might have been taken aback when I first had my notions that you were the Prowler. But whatever hesitancy or fear I felt quickly disappeared. I've never loved you more than I do at this very moment. It's actually quite arousing, knowing that my future husband is the notorious Prowler. A great relief washed over me like a waterfall. I stuffed the gardener's eyeballs in my pocket and rushed over to my bride. We embraced and I kissed her, and even though I am a gentleman and usually don't disclose such information, I must say we proceeded to make animalistic love on the hay pile in the corner of the stables. We took our time, not caring if anyone discovered us in the throes of ecstasy. But I couldn't take all night. We didn't want to be found with the corpse of the gardener on the other side of the room, after all. Plus, I mustn't be found out. No one else can know I am the Prowler. Only my bride may know this secret. We finished our night of passion and escaped the stables undetected. We went back inside to the ball that was winding down to make a final appearance. No one seemed to notice our absence. We took to the dance floor like we never left and danced the night away in our macabre lover's embrace. When the evening came to a close, I ushered her down the front steps of the manor to her awaiting carriage. Even though we were surrounded by exiting party guests, we could only see one another, transfixed in each other's gaze, consumed in our lover's world. We agreed to meet in 2 days' time to have an in-depth conversation of my Prowler activities and start preparations for our wedding. We kissed goodnight, and I watched as she was driven away in her carriage. What a great Hallows Eve night it turned out to be. The ball was a success. I did some killing and made love to my future bride. My head hit the pillow with the softest of ease, and my eyes closed quickly to put an end to a beautiful night. Of course, hours later my beautiful slumber was disturbed by screams of terror. Sounds like somebody found the gardener, I said to myself sarcastically, before turning over and going back to sleep. I'll let Father handle the situation this time. I'm very tired, and a gentleman such as myself needs a proper amount of sleep. I was awoken a few hours later as James brought in the morning cup of coffee and paper. Even in my still slumberous state, I could tell something was off with James. He walked over to the side of the bed and slammed the tray with the coffee and paper on my lap. Have you gone mad? You big dumb bastard. What in the hell do you think you're doing? I screamed furiously. He stood there shaking and had the nerve to tell me I was becoming reckless with my murderous pursuits, that he was afraid that we were going to get caught. I barked back at him that everything will be fine. We won't get caught if you just keep your damn mouth shut and keep your bloody cool. I ordered him to leave my presence, that the sight of him was making me sick. He turned and walked out, mumbling a name under his breath. It sounded like Liza. It looks like I'm going to have to dispose of my trusty chauffeur, I thought as I unfurled the paper. Oh well, I'll worry about that later. As I gazed upon the front page of the London Journal, the headline caught my attention. 2 potential Prowler witnesses found murdered on Burlington estate grounds. The 2 potential Prowler witnesses who were under the employ of the Burlington family and who claimed to have witnessed, in some fashion, the death of Police Commissioner Nigel Burlington's wife Agatha and a stable hand just a few short nights ago, were both themselves found savagely slain. The maid, a Mrs. Gertrude Steinbottoms, was found on the outskirts of the woods. A knife had been driven into her skull, and her ears were removed as the Prowler's trophies. It was said she was heading into the city to pick up food and other goods for a costumed affair the Burlingtons held last night at their manor. She never reached her destination. Meanwhile, the gardener, a Mr. Joseph Wilkins, was found brutally murdered in the stables, having his eyes removed as trophies in the process. And like the other past victims, the Prowler's poem was left atop their bodies like a macabre calling card. I had the privilege to speak to the Earl of Burlington when I arrived at the scene this morning. He understandably didn't offer much, but his dismay at another death occurring at his lovely home, and wanted to offer his deepest condolences to the victims' loved ones. His 2 sons, Police Commissioner Nigel and the Earl-in-Waiting Neville, could not be reached at this time for further comments. What sad state of affairs we live in, dear readers, where a respected, long-lasting family of the peerage must suffer through so much death and carnage. When will this madness all end? Until tomorrow, dear readers, stay safe out there. Well, well, they discovered old Gertrude. About damn time, you incompetent pricks. Just 2 more victims to add to my ever-growing impressive list. I then flipped over to the society section of the paper, and my Hallows Eve ball was in the headlines as a smashing success. I was atop the headlines in 2 sections of the paper and couldn't even enjoy it, because I was starting to lose my temper from how James spoke to me earlier. No one speaks to me in that fashion. No one who intends to keep their life, that is. Who does that drunkard think he is, speaking to me like that? I am his better. I should be spoken to with respect. I think tonight I will take to the streets once again. I must release this fury on some unsuspecting soul. I must quench this bloodlust. I prepared myself for the day and went down to breakfast, and as I made my way down the stairs, I beheld a beautiful sight. Pure sadness and melancholy. No smiles, no bubbly personalities greeting me in this early hour, just somber hellos. I guess it takes me killing a few people around here to get what I want. I sat down at the table, and once again I was greeted with my father and brother looking like some droopy-faced hounds. I wanted to shout, "Cheer up, gentlemen! No use crying over spilled milk!" It is just the help after all. I must say, I was quite famished this morning. I needed to eat a proper breakfast and build up strength for tonight's excursion as well. Mr. Lyles put before me some fresh country ham, accompanied with sausage and eggs, and fresh biscuits. A proper hearty breakfast for a proper gentleman, as myself. The meal was finished with a cup of coffee and a plate of spotted dicks. I quickly wrapped up breakfast after dessert, for father and brother were starting to lament over the recent deaths, and I for one hadn't the time for that shite. I made my way up to my chambers and prepared my instruments. I spent the next hour scrubbing and fine-cleaning my tools of the trade, so much so that you could eat a 5-course meal with them and not give it a second thought. I then adorned my evening attire, complete with my cloak, top hat, and white gloves. I grabbed my black bag, then bounded down the stairs into the waiting carriage outside. "To the West End, James, and be quick about it," I shouted, not even bothering looking towards his direction as I entered the carriage. I was still filled with a pure disgust for the simple bastard from earlier in the day. We finally arrived about a half hour later at the old familiar corner of Denmark Street. I exited the carriage and turned and looked at James. "Have the carriage standing by. No fuck-ups, you drunkard, for you do not want to face my wrath," I growled at him. I then proceeded down Denmark Street. What carnage I've spilt on these cobblestone streets. Lives I have altered with each swipe from my blade. Just then I took a deep breath, taking in the cool night London air. I'm home, I thought. My trance of nostalgia was broken by a lady of the night, walking about, advertising her servicements, if you will, to the scant public that was moving about the street. I stood and watched. There seemed to be no takers, and not to seem rude, but looking at her condition and the state she was in, I could see why. I could see her disappointment strewn across her face as she received no interest, and followed as she shuffled down the alleyway. I stalked her like a predator stalks its prey in the jungle. I pulled my hatchet this time from the bag. It's time to get messy tonight. As I got closer to her, I thought I could hear weeping. I placed my hand on her shoulder and spun her around. "Let me put you out of your misery, my dear," I said with a sarcastic tone, as I brought my arm down, burying the hatchet in her forehead. Her body dropped to its knees instantly. It took some doing and some extra force, but I was finally able to extract the hatchet from her skull after a few moments of difficulties. I then took my time and performed an amateur autopsy, removing the parts she was intending to sell as my trophies. I then placed my poem upon her mutilated corpse and made my way back to the carriage. When I returned to the end of the street, I expected to see James in the carriage waiting for me, like always, but this time it was not. I stood there waiting, for mere minutes, yes, but it seemed like hours. I just killed someone, damn it. I haven't the time or luxury of just hanging about. As my blood was beginning to reach a boiling point, I saw the carriage come into view. I quickly got in and ordered him to take us home. I tried calming myself on the ride back, but as we arrived back home, I bursted out of the carriage and pulled James down from the driver's seat and dragged him inside the carriage. I slapped him across the face and shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you? I could have been spotted just standing on the corner, standing there for minutes, trying to dodge and hide my face from passerbys. I'm the fucking Earl in waiting to House Burlington, James. How would it look for me to be seen a mere block away from the latest Prowler victim? Are you trying to get me caught?" He began to mumble his reasoning. He wanted to keep the carriage out of sight until my return. I slapped him again. That was not my order. Incompetence or stupidity will get you nowhere, James. He then began to cry and apologize. Then out of nowhere, said maybe we should get caught. All of this carnage must end. We deserve to pay for our crimes. I leaned closer and smelled the alcohol emanating from his breath. He then uttered Liza, my poor Liza, over and over again. I sat back and said, "So that's it, James. It's the spirits talking. You're quite the capable, trusty fellow, but get that booze in you, and you're all 6s and 7s. I reached into my bag and pulled out some of the fresh entrails I just collected from that streetwalker, and I threw it in his face, smearing it all around, some of it even getting in his mouth. I then reached for my blade and brought it to his throat. Don't you ever fucking threaten me or speak to me like you did earlier again. You'll follow orders that are given to you, when they are given to you. You are my servant. I am your better, and you will do your damnedest to remember that. It shouldn't be hard to forget. There will be no more screw-ups, and there will be no more mentioning of Liza. Listen to these words carefully, James, for I am the bringer of death, and will dispose of you without a second thought. I will gladly add your name to the lists of victims. Now take your ass to your quarters and sleep it off. I require your services tomorrow," I said threateningly. I gathered my things and went to my chambers. I stored my trophies away, and after a long trying day I crawled into bed, anxious to end the day and start tomorrow so I could see my love once again. I laid there for a moment and thought, I know I'll have to dispose of James. 'Tis a shame, really. Such a trusted employee at one time. Oh well, I'll start interviewing new chauffeurs tomorrow. The Prowler, Part 14. I awoke to a raven cawing at my window. I stared at it slumber-eyed, but still took in its black magnificence. It turned its head to the right, and as it did, my chamber door opened, and in walked a hesitant James. I had to chuckle to myself. It was as if the raven was signaling James' nearing demise. At the window, ready to usher him to the afterlife, ready to usher him to hell. James slithered to me, with his head hung low, and laid the tray on my lap, consisting of my morning paper and coffee. He tried to crawl off in shame, but as he reached the door, I reminded him I required his services today. I informed him he needed to clean the carriage inside and out, in preparations for my date with my love, Lady Smith. Also, he needed to arrange a private dining room for the two of us at Lombardo's, the finest Italian restaurant in London. I dismissed him with a wave of my hand and opened the paper to read of my latest exploits. The headline was catching. Prowler returns to Denmark Street, slays 21st victim. The Prowler struck again last night, back at his old familiar trappings of Denmark Street. The body of Beatrice Dunwoody, a suspected lady of the evening, was found horrifically massacred in one of the side alleys. Dunwoody, age 44, was found with a hatchet-sized hole in her head, and her womanly parts were removed as trophies. The Prowler's poem was laid atop her person as well. Dunwoody, whose residence was nearby, left no friends or loved ones behind. Another horrific crime indeed. A question I have, dear readers, is what in the world is this madman doing with the parts he collects from his victims? Perhaps we shall never know. Until tomorrow, dear readers, stay safe. A proper article from that filth peddler for once. I'm slightly impressed, but not too much, but slightly. He also brought up a subject matter I've talked about earlier, wanting to go in depth on in this journal, and that is the storage and reasonings of my trophy collection. First off, breakfast. Then I will return and document my reasonings. Such things shouldn't be discussed before a proper breakfast. I exited my chambers to unwanted pleasantries from the help. I thought such shite was over with after the killings of their colleagues, but these resilient fuckers are back at high spirits. Damn my life. I walked past every smiling face and growled until I reached the table. Father was there. Nigel was not. A plate of eggs, biscuits, and sausages greeted me on the table, accompanied by a cup of fresh brewed coffee. Father and I talked of upcoming family charitable affairs when I finished breakfast and returned to my chambers. I collected my journal from the desk along with a pen and moved to the bookcase. I stood in front of it and placed my fingers on the top binding of the book, Anatomy and Curiosities of the Human Body, pulling it towards me. As I did this, the bookcase moved to the side, collapsing behind the wall, revealing my secret chamber. I grabbed a candle from the wall to light my way and secluded myself inside. Mr. Johns asked the question, "What do I do with my trophies?" Well, the answer is simple. I preserve them in a special liquid and store them in glass jars I procured from the medical college. They surround me as I speak, secured on the bookcases inside my secret room, alongside my private library of books on the occult. Which brings me to question number 2. What am I going to do with said trophies? Well, as I said, I'm very big into the occult. I have all the rarest books on demonology and the raising of spirits and dark forces. I'm going to raise a demon. Or at least try to, anyway. The parts that I have collected shall be my vessel to bring a demon into this world. At least that's the general idea. As a founding member of the secret society of the Cloaked Prophets, it is my duty to pull off such a task. The other members expect it of me. So I have my reasons for collecting my trophies. I'm not just some madman taking parts. And now you know. I heard the chiming of the grandfather clock and realized time had gotten away from me. My date with my love approached. I blew out the candle and left my secret chamber, giving another pull on the book, closing the bookcase behind me. I made sure all preparations were taken care of for the evening with James, then proceeded to get ready for my rendezvous. I picked out a fine black suit and laid it out on the bed, then trimmed up my rogue facial hairs and made sure the mustache and goatee were looking accordingly. Brushed and waxed, I was ready to go. Looking a proper gentleman, I grabbed my top hat and cloak and was out the door into the waiting carriage. "To Lady Smith's manor, and be quick about it," I barked at James. I arrived on time promptly at 7 and went inside to wait for my love, having a conversation with Lord Smith about the wedding as I waited. I noticed her from the corner of my eye, standing atop the staircase, looking beautiful as always, dressed in purple. We said our goodbyes to her father, and we were on our way. On our way to the carriage, my love dropped her handbag. She continued walking as I reached down to pick it up, and as I did, I looked up and saw James whisper something into her ear as she entered the carriage. "What is this shite?" I thought, trying to control my anger. I got up and quickly moved to the carriage. "To the restaurant now, James," I ordered him as I went inside. As the carriage started to move, I asked my love what that foul-smelling miscreant said to her, and without hesitation she told me. She said James whispered, "If only you knew, you would not be here. Please, my lady, stay away. I have horrors to tell you." "Son of a bitch!" I exclaimed loudly. "This drunkard just refuses to learn." My lady had a look of concern and confusion on her face. I proceeded to tell her of James' reckless behavior as of late, his actions last night, and the things he's been saying. "He obviously doesn't know that you know my secret, so once again he was trying to get me caught with exposing my secret to you." I sat there thinking, getting lost in my thoughts. I realized it became quiet. I looked over at my love, and before I could utter a word, she said sinisterly, "He has to go." I must admit, I had never been more aroused in my life than at that very moment. My wife, my blood countess. I told her I agreed. He's just not trustworthy any longer. She smiled and looked out the window. Then she said something that cemented my love for her for lifetimes. "I know how we should do it. I know how to dispose of James, neatly and properly, my handsome husband," she said in all seriousness, with a slight grin across her face. "We'll talk of it over dinner." I agreed, and we kissed. What a macabre, beautiful, deadly couple we are, I thought as the carriage pulled up to the restaurant. We exited the carriage and told James to wait for however long it took. We entered the restaurant and were ushered to the back to a private, secluded table. We ordered the finest foods they had on the menu, accompanied with the finest drink, then began to talk. We conversed about everything, our wedding, our beautiful future. Then she wanted to know how it all started, what made me into the Prowler. "This is an interesting question, my love, and one I knew you would want to know eventually," I said with a smile. "I've never really thought about it. I have a hunger inside me, a rage that must be tamed, but I can't say for certain. Sometimes things just are, and I'm just a killer." She nodded her head and said, "I understand. And as you know, I'm fine with you being the Prowler, and don't mind that you've killed. You know I don't mind when I saw you standing in the stables. I wasn't scared, as a matter of fact. I knew, and you know this. However, now that we are to be married, you must cease your Prowler activities. There can be no more murders." "May I ask why?" "If you don't have a problem with my murderous pursuits, then why must I stop?" I said confusingly. "For one, we are to be married, and that brings with it a family, beautiful children, and I can't risk you being caught when our children are involved. Also, you will be the next Earl of Burlington soon. Your father is aging, and the title will be yours in no time, along with the responsibilities and everything that entails. If you are caught, you will ruin the history and legacy of your family's historic name. It must all end, my love. Your bloodthirsty work is done. The people will never forget the Prowler," she said with a wide smile. I sat and took in everything she had just said to me. Everything she said was true, and for the sake of our future and our family's future, I agreed. But under one condition. I must do away with the people in this world that have wronged me in some way. Parker Johns, James, and especially that bastard Jack the Ripper," I said in a stern voice. My love sat there, nodded her head, and smiled. "I agree with your terms, and I'll even help you myself," she said devilishly. "Excellent, my love," I exclaimed. "Now tell me what you had in mind for James." She proceeded to tell me of a book of poisons she had been reading, and she knew the ingredients to make an untraceable poison that could be mixed into his wine, and it would look as if he succumbed from his drinking. I told her I loved it. He's so paranoid, he probably wouldn't let me close enough to kill him. Now this way, he won't suspect a thing. We'll do it once we return you to your manor. Me and my love devised a devilishly brilliant plan before leaving the table, then made our way back to the carriage. I grinned at James to proceed back to Lady Smith's manor, and we were off. You see, the plan was for me to ask to use the bathroom to handle some personal business, and while I was away, my love would invite James inside and ask what information he had to tell her. While listening to what he had to say, she would offer him some wine to get him comfortable. Now the mischievous part is I'm not really using the washroom. I'm actually retrieving the ingredients for the poison. I mix the ingredients and sneak my way back downstairs and slip the poison to my love while she's pouring another round of drinks. She then mixes it into James' wine and hands him the cup, where we then watch him die a slow, painful death. We arrived at the manor, and our plan went off without a hitch. As James sat there dying, choking on his own blood, I looked him in the eyes and informed him that his sad attempt to inform my love of my secret was futile, for she had already known. His eyes widened as my love came into view and smiled in his face. We both laughed as he finally died. I dragged his body back to the carriage and stuffed him inside. A gentleman such as myself shouldn't have to perform such physical work. I kissed my love goodnight and told her I would see her tomorrow. I then drove off in great haste back to the manor. I'll try and sneak his corpse back to his quarters and lay him in his bed, while strewing a few bottles around the room, looking like he died from a long night of boozing. That's 1 down and 2 to go. Check James off the list. Now it's your turn, Jack. You're next. The Prowler, Part 15. I awoke this morning, feeling a sense of relief, like a warm torrent of water has just washed over my entire body. Now with that drunkard disposed of, there's no one who can tell of my murderous endeavors. The only problem is, there is no one to fetch my morning paper and coffee. Oh well, I'll just have to find those 2 pleasantries at the breakfast table. I slipped on my robe and descended the staircase. Passing by a few somber faces, I assumed someone found James. Let's see if my love's idea worked, and they think he succumbed to his boozing. I made my way to the table, where my father, brother, coffee, and paper were waiting for me. And just as I thought, I was greeted with James' demise. James is dead. Seems as though the poor bastard drank himself to death last night, my father said in a somber note. It worked. My love's plan indeed worked. The fools bought it, I thought with a slight grin as I sipped from my coffee. Oh no, father. 'Tis a shame. I always warned him the drink would do him in, I said in my most concerned voice. I truly should become a thespian. My acting skills are just too grand. I straightened out the paper to get a proper look at the headlines. I tuned out Father's response to my comment about James, for I was filling with a rage, the likes I have never seen nor felt. This bloody damn headline, has me on the brink of nausea. Jack the Ripper strikes again, leaving most gruesome murder yet. Last night, the Ripper of the East End performed his most violent murder to date, with the savage slaying of Mary Kelly, a streetwalker in the Whitechapel district. No witnesses or leads can be reported at this time. The Ripper is still at large. Meanwhile, back on the West End, there is no news to report on the Prowler front, for there was no new victim claimed, thankfully. Until tomorrow, dear readers, stay safe out there. What the hell was that shite I was forced to read? They give my headlines to that poser just because I was absent for one day. And I wasn't even really absent. I helped dispose of that bastard James. Damn it all to hell, not being able to take credit for his death. Oh well, 'tis the price for making it look like an accident. But whoever finds this journal, take note that I took part in his death and add him to my impressive list. I tried to hide my rage and disgust from Nigel and Father and finished up breakfast. I had to prepare for my rendezvous with my love, and after reading that filth, I couldn't wait to talk to her. She will understand. I was to meet her this afternoon at her manor for tea, 12 o'clock sharp. I got cleaned up and dressed and was on my way. Mr. Lyles drove me until I could find a suitable replacement for James. Before I knew it, we were at the manor. I exited the carriage and made my way inside, where my love was waiting for me, holding the morning paper. I read the article, my love. I'm sure you must be pretty upset, she said concerningly. I knew she would understand, I thought. She truly gets me. Yes, the article angered me very much. I'm tired of this Jack the Ripper bastard stealing my headlines. He must be next on the list. With my upcoming retirement, he can't be left to carry on his murderous ways, I said menacingly. We sat down and had our tea. We conversed for hours about many a topic, her father even stopping in for a few to see how everything was going. Once alone, we began to devise a plan for Jack. We decided it was time to dispose of him tonight. We would pose as an ordinary couple and walk the alleyways of Whitechapel, luring him in slowly. Then when the moment was right, we would strike. Night was quickly approaching. I changed clothes there, for I brought my Prowler attire with me, in anticipation that we would go tonight. The plan slightly changed, though. My love would pose as a lady of the evening, and I right behind her, acting as if I was looking to buy the perfect trap. We changed into our proper attires, then headed out to the carriage, where we were driven to the West End by her driver, Bartholomew. There was a chill in the air tonight. As we stepped out of the carriage, I gave my love a kiss, and we made our way towards the alleyways. My blade strapped inside my vest, ready for me to strike when the bastard approaches. I'm ready, Jack. A fog began to roll in as we entered the alleyways. My love entered first and stood up against the wall, waiting. I kept a close eye on my love, but once the fog became thicker, I moved in. I walked up to her and pretended to proposition her. We then began to kiss, trying to seem as vulnerable as we could. Then out of nowhere, we heard an eerie whistling. I brought my hand to the handle of the blade and was ready to strike. The whistling grew closer and closer, accompanied by shoes tapping softly on the cobblestone. I could feel my love begin to slightly tense. I gently caressed her arm, letting her know everything was going to be okay. Then a silence, broken by a voice. "Well, look what we have here. Such a lovely couple, but sadly, it's time to die," he said with such assuredness. With the sound of his next footstep and my love's startled reaction, I knew he'd just emerged from the shadows and fog. I quickly spun my body and swiped my arm to the left, blade in hand, slashing it across his unsuspecting throat. "You're right, Jack. It is time to die." "It is Jack, isn't it?" I said sarcastically. I heard him gargling on his own blood. I turned to my love and kissed her. Then we both started to laugh. As we both leaned in, however, we were greeted with a devastating shock. The face staring back at me, the notorious Jack the Ripper, was Nigel. My God, my brother, the damn police commissioner of the East End Police Department, is Jack the Ripper. I was stunned. I could not move. I was literally standing there like I was encased in stone. My love jostled me loose, and I snapped to. I placed my poem on his body, and before he died, I called him a dumb bastard. Serves you right. There's only room for one killer in the family. Before we left, I took his bag of death with me, and any other evidence that would suggest that he was the Ripper. Now it just looked like the police commissioner was murdered. We quickly made our way to the carriage and went back to the manor. We sat in silence on the drive back. People are going to think I killed Nigel because he was the police commissioner, but that is not the case. I only killed him because I thought I was simply just killing Jack the Ripper. I never would have killed my brother otherwise. Oh well, people will learn the truth once they read this journal. Once we arrived at my love's manor, she secretly snuck me to her chambers, and I spent the night, where we made passionate love. Check another off the books. That's 2 down and 1 to go. It's going to be a chaotic few days when my brother's body is discovered. But that filth peddler, Parker Johns, will soon be next. The Prowler, Part 16, the finale. I awoke quite sad this morning. I'm very family-oriented, and having killed my brother is bothering me so. I've protected that simple bastard all our lives, from wee pants up till recently, when I disposed of his charlatan of a wife. I fought for my family. It's the most important. But it is not my fault for what happened. What a secretive bastard my brother turned out to be. As I laid in my bed, staring up at the ceiling, someone rapped lightly on my chamber door. I told whatever soul that stood outside to quickly enter or be gone, for I hadn't the time for such foolishness this early in the morning. The door slowly opened, and it was Father that stood before me, standing there as if he were bewitched by the devil himself. His head hung low when the words escaped his lips. "Nigel is dead. Your brother's body was found in an alleyway in Whitechapel." I sat up quick in my bed, feigning my surprise. "Not Nigel! Not my brother! How could something like this happen? Who perpetrated this foul deed, Father? I must know!" I shouted in a form of faux outrage. He stood in front of my bed, continued in his shocked state. They found a poem on his person. He is the latest victim of the Prowler." he mumbled dishearteningly. "No, Father! Not that bastard the Prowler!" I screamed out in outrage, once again showing off my exquisite acting skills. My father stood there and wept, weeping like a wee babe. The once booming voiced strong man, tyrant at times, reduced to a blubbering child. The weakness turned me ill, all the while feeling a touch of sadness inside, my only victim I felt anything for. I helped Father back to his chambers to get some rest and to calm my nerves from his tearful emotions. I then proceeded down to the breakfast table for some much-needed coffee and the morning paper. As I sat down at the table, I noticed a letter from the London Journal sitting atop the paper. It was a letter from Parker Johns expressing his condolences of my brother's demise and a request for an interview. Normally, I would tell the prick to jog on, but I think an interview is perfect. He's last on my list, and this is a perfect way for me to get close to him. I shall set up an interview with him for later in the evening, along with my love Lady Smith, where we will inform him we have big news to reveal, which is our wedding announcement. Then, when the time is right, we dispose of the bastard. I took a sip of coffee and unfolded the paper, and of course I made the headlines. West End Police Commissioner found slain in Whitechapel, claimed by the Prowler. Shocking news to report, dear readers. West End Police Commissioner Nigel Burlington was found slain in the Whitechapel district of London. That's Ripper territory, but surprisingly, he was murdered by the West End Prowler. His calling card poem was found atop of the body. Sad times for the community and for the Burlington family, which has already been through enough tragedy these recent weeks. The family has not spoken yet of this recent tragedy, but I'm hoping to speak to someone from the family in the near future. As they grieve, however, we grieve with them as a community and as a nation. On behalf of the London Journal, we would like to express our deepest condolences to the Burlington family. I must pose 2 questions, however, that we may never know the answers to. What was Police Commissioner Burlington doing traversing the back alleys of Whitechapel? Was he following a lead of some sort on the Prowler, or possibly the Ripper? And what was the Prowler doing on the East End? That's not his territory. Like I said, 2 interesting questions to think about. Until tomorrow, dear readers, stay safe out there. I sat the paper down in annoyance. Yes, 2 questions that sadly won't be answered, not in my lifetime anyway. It sickens me not being able to take the credit for disposing of Jack the Ripper. But once again, I had to put my family's well-being first and cover up my brother's extracurricular activities. The shock would have just been too much for Father, and would have cast a dark shadow over my family's good and ancient name. Hopefully, when I'm long dead and buried, someone will find this journal and discover and credit my slaying of Jack the Ripper. I finished eating breakfast, then headed back to my chambers to get changed and begin my day. I sent word to Parker Johns and set up our interview for 8 o'clock sharp at my love Lady Smith's manor. A promise of a newsworthy announcement and a lavish dinner further sealed the deal, plus an agreement from myself to answer any question posed to me, no matter how personal, also sealed the deal. He was of course shocked I agreed to such terms, but he doesn't know I plan on removing his head before the evening is through. I spent the hours before this evening's affair making sure my blade was cleansed and in fine working condition, and then I spent a few hours toiling in my secret study, reading up on some demonology and how to conjure up a demon. I have my eye on a particular foul-smelling fellow that should be a pure delight to summon back to this putrid earth. I was so enthralled with the ancient text that I almost misplaced the time. I quickly dressed in my evening best and hastily made my way to Smith Manor, for the hour was approaching. A half hour later, I was standing on my love's front step, rapping on her door. I was on time and had arrived before Mr. Johns. I was ushered inside and led to the parlor, where my bride was waiting for me, sitting at a table that was set up for our interview. Adorned with the finest eats and drinks, the evening was catered perfectly, and the table was immaculate, made even more so by my love's radiant beauty, that put a perfect finishing touch on this catered affair. Everything was in place to put Mr. Johns at ease. As we waited for his arrival, we hatched our plan to dispose of him once and for all. And since he was taking his sweet time getting here, we were able to plan it out to the very last detail. No shocker, of course, that someone as smug as him would show up late to a gathering with 2 members of nobility and a beautiful evening such as this. Is there a man more deserving of being killed than him? I think not. And it's what was coursing through my mind as the prick scampered in like a wee schoolgirl 20 minutes late. He sat down and apologized for his tardiness, but the disrespect was already committed. We of course acted as if we accepted his apology and told him everything was fine, continuing to ensure his comfort. He sat down and we began our meal and interview. He began with asking the news we had to share, and we informed him of our engagement and upcoming nuptials. He congratulated us and said the uniting of 2 historic families would do the city and country some good during these trying times, an escape, if you will, from this Prowler business. I smiled at him and said, "But of course, you are quite right, my good sir." May I say, during this part of the conversation, I was thinking of nothing more than ripping his entrails from his frail body. I cannot stand this pompous, grotesque bastard. He then quickly turned the conversation into more personal, familial affairs, asking about the numerous tragedies that have occurred at our stately manor and on estate grounds. I turned to my love while his head was down and nodded in her direction, putting our plan in motion. She excused herself from the table to go check on the status of the main course of our meal, and I began to answer his questions. Yes, there have been horrible tragedies that have befelled my family and home, I started, but there was nothing that could be done about those events, for we were unbeknownst marked by the Prowler, I said in a somber tone. Yes, I've always wondered how was it that the Prowler always seemed to be around and move about freely on your family's estate, almost as if he lived there, he said in a smug, condescending tone. Just then my love emerged from the back with the servants, bringing out the main course. Well, Mr. Johns, I have a perfect explanation for that, I said as the plates were being placed in front of us. Before I continued, I looked at my love, and she grinned and winked at me, confirming she had completed her task. Mr. Johns then looked at me as he shoveled a fork full of lobster into his gullet and said, "Please continue, Lord Burlington. You were saying—" "Yes, as I was saying, there's a perfect explanation for that, and that explanation is because he does," I said in a sinister tone. Mr. John's eyes widened and said, "Excuse me, Lord Burlington, what was it that you just said?" "You heard me, you smug bastard. The Prowler does live on the estate, and the Prowler is me." He began to choke. "Tell me, Mr. Johns, are you enjoying the garlic butter on your steak, or the clarified butter with your lobster?" "What's that, Mr. Johns? I can't hear you. You're choking." "That's because we added an extra ingredient to your food. Poison," I said sinisterly. He began to convulse and choke on the vomit and blood that began to expel from his mouth. He writhed in his chair, and when he began to make too much noise, I grabbed the fork that was to my right, then jammed it into his eyeball. He then fell forward, dead, as his head hit the table. Finally, I've been ridden of this tabloid miscreant. I sat there and felt a sense of relief wash over my body as my love gave me a kiss. We then finished our meal as we enjoyed our macabre celebration. I wrapped Mr. Johns in the tablecloth to prevent him from bleeding out on my love's fine rug. As we finished our evening, I kissed my love goodnight and quickly got Mr. John's body out of the mansion before Mr. Smith discovered what we had done. I carried him to the carriage and threw him in, and we were on our way. As I rode off, I couldn't help but think of how much stronger me and my love's bond has grown over these past few days and nights, and after these past few murders. She has helped me unbelievably, doing away with the scum that has tormented me so, and for that I will be forever grateful. I will forever love her. On my way back home, I dropped Mr. John's body on the side of the street near his home. Thankfully, unseen and unheard, as there wasn't a soul out. Before leaving, I placed my poem on his body and made my way home. Once I arrived back to the manor, I quickly made my way to my chambers, for I was tired. Before going to bed, I sat down at my writing desk and wrote one last letter to the papers. I did not announce my retirement, for I'll let the bastards of this city and the world live in a constant fear of when I might strike next. They will forever fear of what lurks in the shadows as they walk down the streets, always look upon their neighbors with a hesitant gaze, not knowing if they could be the prowler that stalks the streets. I will forever be remembered. To whomever finds this journal, whichever generation of this family, take great pride in the fact that you are related to the Prowler. Don't let the simple bastards say otherwise. I caused sheer panic at the end of the 19th century. London quivered at the thought of my name. I could never be caught. The simple bastards couldn't do it. The murders only stopped because I allowed them to stop. I'm the bringer of death, the menace that stalked the shadows. The most deadly thing that stalked these streets since the Black Death, centuries earlier. I shall never be forgotten. I, however, gave up my murderous pursuits for my family's well-being and excellent reputation. That's the most important thing, and whoever finds this, remember that. Most importantly, however, I stopped for my love, Lady Smith, who will now be Lady Burlington. We are to start a family. I have to stop the bloodshed, so I must end it, and I did it for love. This was the final entry from the Prowler's journal. There were other things written by Neville Burlington, but nothing ever again as the Prowler. The final letter he talked about writing at the end of the entry, if you're curious, read as follows. I have just killed again, and I'm sorry to inform you it's your very own paper's filth peddler, Parker Johns. By the time you read and publish this letter, his body will have been discovered, and you will see how I finish my latest masterpiece. A word to the wise. You best publish this letter, or I will be paying a visit to the heads of the London Journal. Publish this letter so that the people know I am the Merchant of Death, and at any moment I could pay them a visit. Take a breath when you walk down the street, for you never know when I might strike next. I am the Prowler, and it does not matter who you are or where you reside, for when I decide it's your time, then I shall pay you a visit. This was the last thing Lord Burlington did as the Prowler. It is known as the Merchant of Death letter, or the Pay You a Visit letter. It left the West End and London as a whole in a state of fear for the years that followed. As I said earlier when this started, the finding of this journal after a century of dormancy sent a shockwave through the realm and even the world. Experts and fans alike of serial killers were also left stunned at the revelation of the identities of the Prowler and Jack the Ripper. Two individuals people searched the identities for decades and never thought would be discovered. Also, finally revealed in this earth-shattering discovery is the reasonings of both killers' abrupt ends to their killing sprees. We finally now know why Jack the Ripper stopped killing and why the West End Prowler stopped. Also, understandably shocked are the remaining members of the Burlington family, especially the present Earl of Burlington. This has been quite the scandal. Neville II, the 12th Earl of Burlington, who is the great-great-grandson and named after his now notorious grandfather, is taking all of this news extremely hard. There have been rumors of many other disturbing things found. The Prowler's black bag, still containing his instruments of death, the famous cloak and top hat, and the location of his secret chambers, which will be searched shortly. That's been the latest in the news recently. The Prowler's secret chamber revelation. All the news companies will be there when they crack the seal, hoping to find more macabre artifacts, like his occult book collection, possibly his preserved trophy collection, but most of all, find a clue, if any, to his untimely death. You see, not much is known of Lord Burlington's, the Prowler's, death. He died just a few short years after his last Prowler journal entry. His last known business, where we know he was alive, was his trip to America. He was alive when he got on the ship. He went there supposedly on family business to start up a few factories and mills, but the rumors persist that he went to New York specifically to acquire an ancient book on demonology. We don't know if he died in the States and his body was brought back, or if he died shortly after he returned home. Ship's logs report he was on the return voyage home as passenger, not cargo, but when the ship returned to English shores, there were no reports or sightings of the Earl's arrival, just his wife, Lady Smith Burlington. She was seen receiving bags of luggage and an elongated box, almost coffin shape. Only she knows of her husband's fate. Her journals have been discovered, along with her husband's regular journals, and they will be sorted and searched to try and find the answer. Speaking of Lady Smith Burlington, this earth-shattering discovery did not only reveal her husband's identity as the Prowler, but also revealed her involvement in his last few murders, information that shocked people the most, especially the reputation she had as a caring person and that of a fine lady of the realm. She lived a long, eventful life, caring for and raising their children and keeping the family strong and powerful with her business acumen. She never remarried, but was one of the most powerful, influential socialites of the realm. This is all why people are so shocked the most. Lady Smith Burlington, a murderer, a poisoner, an accomplice in her husband's murderous endeavors. It's simply unbelievable. Her journals and books have also been discovered and are eagerly waiting to be looked into, along with countless other items. There's still so many things to discover and look through, especially with the upcoming search through the Prowler's secret chamber and Lady Smith Burlington's personal journals. I'm sure I'll be back talking about the latest revelations of Lord Burlington, the Prowler, and his murderous love, Lady Smith Burlington's newest, deadly secrets. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.